players out there, and the Raptors took advantage. But what's done is done, right? I mean, we can't sit here and kill Kawhi. It's not like he chose who he was going to guard and who was supposed to be in the lineup for their opponents. But, Kawhi definitely deserves it. Like I said before, completely did a 180 on his reputation. And now going into the offseason, he is one of the most sought after free agents on the market. Probably the top one. I know Kevin Durant's still going to command a max deal somewhere, but Kawhi's probably the best healthy player hitting the market. And you saw even during the parade, he was pretty non-committal about his future. He said, let me celebrate this with my teammates. I'll think about this, in the future, and we'll see what happens in the next few weeks because, after we recap these finals, Ben, player movement's going to be absolutely crazy. And it starts with a guy like Kawhi Leonard, and he deserves it with the way he's played this postseason.
Yeah, and I mean, speaking of the offseason, the other guy we'd be really remiss if we didn't give a little bit extra credit for here is Masai Ujiri, who you mentioned, but, Marc Gasol after the finals had a line about how Fred VanVleet had watermelons, referring to a certain body part that conveys a sense of confidence. And I think you could say the same thing about Masai Ujiri, who put it all on the line, really, for this trade. I mean, it was, if this didn't work out, they were going to go into full rebuild, pretty much. I mean, it was kind of in the cards that if Leonard leaves and they don't win, he's going to tear it down. He's got expiring contracts. He was going to just take it down, build it up. And instead, Jason, he ends up building a championship team and gets the first championship in Canada in over 20 years, if I'm not mistaken. So, I mean, just an absolute incredible master turn by him. Really bold there. And that doesn't even note all the other things he did, Jason. And I mean, you can just go down the list. Let's start with the draft, where he has killed it, Jason. Since he's been there, you just look at the draft picks that he's brought in. OG Anunoby didn't even play, but he's been a solid pick later on. A lot of the picks that he got ended up in trades, so obviously they helped get Marc Gasol and Kawhi Leonard, as well as obviously Danny Green. He got Pascal Siakam, who obviously was the second best player here. He was, I don't know if he was the GM at the time when they made the Lowry trade, but he's helped build that team. He helped engineer the deals he had. Ibaka is a guy he brought in. I mean, this team has his fingerprints all over it. And I don't know if there's anyone other than Kawhi who deserves more credit than Ujiri, who really built this team up from a team that really didn't have much hope to now, debatably the best team in the league and certainly the NBA champions.
I mean, it's very deserving. I'm not a big fan of Ujiri, ever since the playoffs 5 years ago with the Nets and the whole, F Brooklyn and all this stuff. But as a basketball mind, I mean, there were reports of the Wizards, I think, offering him a deal of like $10 million a year to come in and be their GM and president of basketball operations. But you can't expect a guy to make an emotional, life-changing decision right after a championship. I think he stays right there. He's made some great moves, and this was a huge gamble trading for Kawhi because they knew that the DeMar DeRozan Kyle Lowry duo was not going to get it done. But he still pulled all the right strings leading up to that trade, getting Ibaka from the Thunder, being that extra piece off the bench, getting VanVleet, who was undrafted, now one of the best role-playing three-point shooters in the game, taking a chance on Pascal Siakam with the 27th pick in 2016, now a finalist for Most Improved, taking Valanciunas with the 5th pick, developing him, and then flipping him for Marc Gasol, because I don't think the Raptors win it without his veteran leadership and, the locker room respect that he commands, and the fact that he's able to hit the 3-point shot, bringing in a guy like Jeremy Lin, even though he played 1 minute in the finals, he's still the first Asian American to ever be an NBA champion. So shouts to Jeremy Lin, as an extra veteran presence. I mean, they just had the right pieces. Kyle Lowry could have said, you know what, you're trading DeMar, trade me too. He was able to put that fire out real fast and was just able to get it done. Kawhi, Kyle Lowry came together. I think Kawhi said to him, look, I know, your best friend was traded, but, let's get to work. We can do this. And they capitalized at the right time. They got the Sixers down, when it was supposed to go overtime in that game 7, they get it done. They somehow dig deep and found something within themselves to be able to beat the Bucks. And then in what everyone was saying was going to be a cakewalk for the Warriors, even without Durant. They came in, they shut everybody up. I mean, you didn't pick the Raptors to win this series. I sure as hell didn't pick the Raptors to win this series. They proved all the doubters wrong, and that started with the architect, that is Ujiri, knew to get rid of Dwayne Casey, bring in a fresh offensive mind, Nick Nurse, who now wins an NBA championship as a rookie head coach. Like I said, I can't say this enough. Everything clicked at the right time for the
Yeah,
Raptors. That's
and
really why we're sitting here
we haven't
talking
even
about
mentioned Fred VanVleet, who was another just masterful move by Ujiri, who basically picked him up off the scrap heap, gets him in there, and one Hubie Brown actually selected Fred VanVleet as the Finals MVP. But he was really the guy who changed this series for the Raptors. And I think if you go past Leonard, I'm not sure there's a guy more responsible for the championship than him. Steps up big time in Game 6 for the Raptors. Um, Hits 5 of 11 from 3, 5 of 5 from the free throw line, on the route to 22 points. And it's just a massive turnaround. Can I just read you his stats in that Philly series that they nearly lost, Jason? He
Please
shot
do.
12.9% from the field. 12.9. His 3-point percentage was 3.6%. Shot 39% from the free throw line. I mean, you couldn't get much worse than that. Then he comes in, he shoots almost 62% from the three-point line against the Bucks, and then finally against the Warriors, puts it all together, is at points the second best player on the floor for the Raptors, and just absolutely leads them and punishes the Warriors every time that they slipped off of him to try and help. I mean, he was huge for them. So, and that was just another move that Ujiri did at the margins that really, to me, swung this. And then the last guy I wanted to talk about from the Raptors, Jason, was Nick Nurse, who takes over this job, and you mentioned it. You know, Ujiri gives him the reins. Really bold move there. Maybe as bold. I think you could make the case that the Nick Nurse move was as bold, if not bolder, than the Kawhi trade, just because you're putting all of your eggs in the basket of a guy who's never coached an NBA game. And you're giving him the reins. And boy, oh boy, Jason, did Nick Nurse coach his butt off in this series in the playoffs.
I'm going to say probably the best thing he did was keep Danny Green in the starting lineup. I'm going to tie in both of your points, Ben, because VanVleet, I know he was out there at the end of games, and he would have had the assist on Lowry's three-pointer at the end of Game 5 had it gone in, but he pulled all the right strings, and the one that stood out to me most was his usage of both Green and VanVleet, because he didn't want to completely kill Danny Green's confidence. He shot the ball a little bit better in the NBA Finals, but he still wasn't great. You know, he was probably the weak link in that Raptors starting lineup, and Nurse stuck with him and knew all the right times and situations within these games to play VanVleet. You know, you saw Powell's minutes kind of go down, and it was really a seven-man rotation, but I thought he used Gasol and Ibaka beautifully. You know, kept Gasol out there at the right times, really got Ibaka out there, you know, at the end of the second quarter, the end of the fourth quarter, just to kind of get those minutes and everything. So it's just his coaching was unbelievable.
I completely agree. His rotations were so crisp. I mean, he experimented in those earlier rounds, and by the time he made it to the conference finals, he knew exactly the rotation he wanted to use. He stuck to it, and his confidence really radiated across the team. And hearing the quotes come out, I think it just speaks to the fact that this team trusts him. They were behind him, and he did a wonderful job mixing it up against the Warriors. And I don't know if there's a better indication of this than his decision to go box and one. He decides to just take Curry out of the game. I mean, you know, obviously it upset Curry. He called it a janky defense. And you could see why, because they basically predicated their entire defense on stopping Curry, and the Warriors couldn't adjust. And that's what Nurse did the entire finals. He found ways to adjust to the Warriors to take them out of what they wanted to do. And ultimately, that's why he and the Raptors are NBA champions. But there was another team involved, Jason. And that is, of course, the Warriors. And that one, Steph Curry, this was supposed to be his year, Jason. That was the story coming into the finals. The Warriors wanted to get him a finals MVP. They wanted to complete that mantle of awards for him. Curry gets the last shot, Jason, in Game 6. A pretty good look. Curry misses it. He is 2 for 20 now on shots like that. It's a tough shot. Obviously it's still a tough shot for anyone, but they ran a graphic at the end there, and it was brutal. I mean, he has not been good in the last 20 seconds of postseason games, Jason. He's missed a lot of shots, and I do wonder, does this put a little bit of a black mark on his legacy? I mean, this is a guy who he's admittedly sort of struggled being the focal point of the offense, Jason.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot to unpack there. I'll start by saying this. Steph Curry is arguably the greatest shooter of all time, but in a looser manner, because when he's falling away or shooting from, 4 feet outside the top of the key, when there's just the ebb and flow of the game, he makes those shots like a layup. But when the game is on the line, I would say the one flaw in Curry's game is that he's not clutch. You look at other guys that had, not as great careers as Steph, but are clutch players, James Harden, Joe Johnson, one of the most clutch players of this generation, guys that hit shots when it counts, Kawhi Leonard in that category. Then you look at guys that are great volume scorers and prolific talents like Curry and Russell Westbrook, and these guys just are not clutch. I mean, you can't kill Steph Curry because he's got a really great all-around game. He can steal the ball. He's not the best defender, but, his assist numbers are decent. He spreads the ball around. He shoots from all over the floor, but his bugaboo is that he's not clutch. So, they designed that play at the end of Game 6, and I thought Steph took that shot way too early because then, there was a scuffle for the ball. Draymond Green tries to call a timeout when they had none left, and that just kind of delayed the inevitable if you're Golden State. But I would have held the ball a little bit longer and not taken such a rush shot. But that does say something about Curry's legacy because this was his time, Ben. No Durant, no Clay. Draymond's not going to lead the team in scoring. Maybe before the Achilles injury, I would have said DeMarcus Cousins had a shot to go for 40, but he's not that player anymore. Steph had that elusive finals MVP in his hands, and it got taken away. And it's not all his fault because he couldn't do it alone, but that just goes to show if the Warriors do lose Clay and they do lose KD, regardless of both of their health statuses, the Warriors are in trouble if they don't get that second elite scorer to pair with Curry, because as great as Steph is, he can't do it alone. You saw that too with Kyrie Irving in Boston. He needs that second star. These guys can put the ball in the basket, but they're not clutch.
They really missed Thompson. I mean, it was amazing that Thompson led the team with 30 points despite missing, a quarter and a half of the game. I mean, he was so clutch in that game, and you could just feel the energy go out of that building the second he goes down. The Warriors were absolutely distraught by it, you could tell. And, it also just, Jason, to your point, I mean, I don't want to rag on Steph Curry. Steph Curry's a great player. And the Raptors just made their entire defense about stopping Curry from the moment Thompson went out. I mean, for the beginning of the game, they were running 2 guys at Curry. Once Thompson went out, there were possessions where they were running 3 guys at Curry. And it is tough. I mean, I don't want to knock him too much. And that last play, I mean, credit goes to Steve Kerr, because that was a phenomenal look for Curry. I mean, you almost can't ask for a better look given game and situation. One of the greatest shooters of all time getting a clean look like that. So that was, I thought, well done. But, Curry, he did his best, but you're right. I mean, he just hasn't been that guy. And it's unclear to me on some level if he feels comfortable being that guy. I sometimes question if that's part of his mentality. It feels like he isn't someone who wants to just take over and crush the other team the way a Kevin Durant does, the way a Kawhi Leonard does, who they just basically say, give me the ball and get the hell out of the way we've seen some of these other guys. And I think that plays in his favor at times, but at other times like this where they need him to take over, it felt like he struggled to really kind of step into that role. I mean, did you feel the same way, Jason, or am I reading too much into this?
I mean, you're right to an extent. Some guys just don't have that clutch gene. And that's Steph Curry. I mean, he's still going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. He's got 2 MVPs, 3 NBA championships.